Growing up in the early 2000s and late 90s, I was really lucky to experience what I like to call a teen culture on steroids. You see, in the 90s, a lot of media companies began to realize that Generation X, and I guess young millennials, were going to be the future consumers of America. And with that came shows, and attached to that, advertisements, that reflect a new exciting teen culture that created an endless stream of games, TV, and movies for teenagers in the 90s and early 2000s. Music had the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, Britney Spears, Westlife, the Moffats, Christina Aguilera, the Spice Girls, S Club 7, Dana Dawson, and the list goes on. Cult classic teen movies were coming out in droves, movies like Drive Me Crazy with a soundtrack featuring Britney Spears, the American Pie series, 10 Things I Hate About You, and countless made-for-TV Disney movies that were made specifically for teen audiences. Game consoles came out with fully realized 100% 3D graphics, like the Xbox original, PlayStation 2, and Nintendo GameCube. These consoles were no longer just toys for kids, but powerful machines that wielded the power to give players the ability to journey to the furthest corners of the universe, with some fun in between along the way. At the same time, the Disney Channel was experiencing what I like to call a golden age, with a plethora of cartoons, movies, and programs that all seemed to mesh together the high school experience. It almost is like Disney had created its own world and hierarchy for the way high school is and was. And as far as games and toys are concerned, let's not forget all of the water guns released back in those days. Think Super Soaker water fights and the strange toys we'd all play with at sleepover parties with our friends. Personally, I have many good memories sitting in the backyard picking the bottom branches of our cherry tree with our neighbors, then having a water fight in their treehouse only to retreat back home and play some 4-player GoldenEye on a Nintendo 64, while NSYNC and the Spice Girls would blurt out of my sister's room. I have pretty fond memories of those times, and one show I nearly forgot that I watched almost daily through the early 2000s was a little show called Lloyd in Space, a strange show starring a green alien who lived in a space station populated with I guess all of the people he'll ever interact with for much of his life. A space station so self-sustaining that we never really have to venture out of its outskirts or away from the school that the kids go to. Let's dive in and get to learn and understand Lloyd's life. Lloyd has a mother who manages much of the going-abouts of the entire station, being the commander, a father who is never seen and rarely acknowledged, and a little sister who plays around with him. The main stars of the show, though, are his classmates and mainly his gang of friends. The human one of the group, Eddie R. Horton, Kirk Blobberts, a fat blob voiced by the same actor as Patrick from SpongeBob, and Douglas McNaughton, a giant brain with feet. For some more context, we learn that the human is the flirtatious fun one who gets the gang into trouble, the blob is just an idiot, think Cat from Victorious, and the brain is just a genius that tends to invent different technologies that give the group an intellectual and technological edge on whatever task the gang wants to partake. Although much of the show tends to be contained within the massive space station of Intrepidville and its outskirts, one would be surprised how huge and encapsulating this seemingly self-contained space station is. In a strange way, in hindsight, the contained nature and social structure of the little space society reminds me of the little world that the Vault Dwellers are stuck in Fallout 3, only ever knowing and experiencing the petty problems brought on by those living adjacent to them. And that's what makes this show seemingly comfortable and really approachable and playful. Nothing too tough or too harsh, but just a bunch of teenagers living about the regular situations that teenagers go through, except with the galactic twist and references to late 90s and early 2000s teen pop culture. Many of the episodes for the show are very impressively creative for a kid show, kind of mirroring the kind of head-scratching mystery and strangeness of some Futurama episodes had. One episode in particular that still to this day has me wondering is the episode Neither Boy Nor Girl. Essentially what occurs is a new student arrives at their school and befriends Lloyd and his friends. This alien is, although somewhat boyish sounding, a chubby yet playful addition to Lloyd's gang that appears to have figured everything out, but one important thing. Its gender. Apparently this alien species has to decide its gender around 13 years old, and it's near its 13th birthday. The boys clamor to figure out what this alien picks for much of the episode, and the boys try to sway the alien towards becoming a boy, whereas the female classmates get a hold of the alien and try to show the cool perks of being a girl. Around the end of the episode, we get a surprise that continues to make me wonder to this day. It was actually quite surprising and strange for a kid's show. The alien not only decides to not reveal his/her gender, but also says that the only way that one will find out its gender is when it falls in love with one of them. A plot twist that has always weirded me out as a kid. Because doesn't it mean that it will just use its gender-neutral status to be able to secretly bind itself romantically with its next best friend? I mean, will it secretly get turned on when it hangs out with the girls or the guys? I mean, I always found it to be very strange, I don't know. But it was something that was quite head-scratching. Now, another episode that I adored was the second episode of the first season. This episode revolves around Lloyd on his search to finding a girl to bring to the upcoming school prom. Initially, Lloyd is quite optimistic about how well he's doing academically and waltzes around the school talking to his friends, bragging about how together his life is, given his recent success. This is all until the popular chick at school, Brittany Bouviac, who we'll discuss later on, announces the upcoming Nebulon dance, a dance where it's practically required for one to bring a date, and not doing so would invite heavy ridicule from one's peers. So, panicked, Lloyd tries to deal with the situation the best way he knows how, by playing baseball outside of the space station. After a bad catch leaves the ball stuck to a higher tier on the space station, Lloyd scales the space station, inadvertently looking through the windows as he attempts to collect the ball. Eventually reaching the top, Lloyd sees a face, and a gorgeous face at that. This face belongs to a girl named Cindy. Cindy appears sweet, cute, and playful. In many ways, she's the perfect girlfriend. Being so nervous, Lloyd forgets to take Cindy's contact information and is left hoping to God that he runs into her again. Of course, the space station is too big for her to search for her window by window. Lucky for him, though, the next day, Cindy has Brittany Bouviac pass Lloyd a hologram note for him. Here, she gives him her contact information and casts Lloyd under the spell of her beauty and charm. Of course, like anything in life, oftentimes things turn out to be too good to be true. I mean, there's no way things can turn out this well this quickly. Anyways, after following up on her hologram, giving her contact info, Lloyd eagerly follows up and gives her a call. He calls her, and although it does seem suspicious that the girl's mother is outside the door yelling at her during every call, Lloyd lets it slide. And unfortunately for Lloyd, during this interaction, he learns something about the girl that is an ultimate deal-breaker. The angry truck driver sounding voice is not the girl's mother, it's her other head. And like its voice, the other head is hideous, both inside and out. Totally opposite to the kind of head Lloyd fell in love with. I love the lesson taught in this episode, though, that all of us have two sides, both a good side and a bad side, and if you truly love and care about someone, you need to accept both sides as is. Lloyd tries to change Cindy's other head by manipulating it into falling in love with him, but as he is unable to do so because of its own stubbornness, Lloyd cracks and trashes the poor girl. He digs into her, and not likely in the way he initially intended, by admitting that he won't be able to tolerate someone with such contrasting personalities. Cindy runs off, shocked and crying herself into a fit. After talking to Eddie Horton, Lloyd learns the most important thing about relationships is being able to deal with the goods and the bads of someone's personality as is. Not looking for perfection, but ending up with it when you learn to accept someone as they truly are. Another memorable episode was the puberty episode. In this episode, Lloyd begins to have dreams of girls in his classes who he wants to pursue, particularly Brittany Bouviac, who he has had dreams of saving her from robot armies, street racing in galactic trenches with her head resting on his lap. Of course, in these fantasies, Lloyd isn't the boy version of himself, but a fully grown adult version with a six-pack and a deep James Earl Jones accent. I think one of the most hilarious parts of this episode is all the crude metaphors to puberty. Lloyd's antenna raising while he thinks of all the good times he'll have with Brittany. The shining and raising of his antenna when two attractive women walk across his locker. It couldn't be more obvious what Disney was trying to refer to. I loved all the references to Lloyd's muscular alpha male alter ego as the Nebulator, how he constantly appears as a hologram throughout the episode and hits up on girls in Lloyd's classes, smooth talking them in the middle of class. I loved how the Nebulator would often beam through Lloyd's antenna in the most inconvenient of times, generally appearing in the middle of a lesson and having the balls to talk to Lloyd's longtime crush, Brittany, with ease, when she initially showed no interest in Lloyd himself. My favorite part in particular was when Brittany pulled Lloyd aside and asked if she would be able to talk to the Nebulator again, being so charmed by him previously. The Nebulator appears and grinds up against Brittany and flirts with her like she's a cocktail waitress at Hooters. Let's not forget that the Nebulator is like 36 and Brittany's like 13. She gasps for his air, only for him to walk off and find a few other girls not in his age range to chat up with. I remember falling on the floor when I saw this scene as a kid. Now, another memorable episode is The Nerd Beyond the Stars. This episode starts off with an introduction of a new student to their school named Larval, who appears to be a giant nerdy caterpillar with no social skills. Upon introduction, Larval is heavily bashed and made fun of by the entire class. The way he looks, talks, and behaves give most members of the school plenty of ammunition to dig into him. But for Lloyd and his friends, they see an opportunity to make a new friend. Them not being the most popular kids in school either. So taking Larval under their wing, the guys show Larval the insides and outs of their school, teaching him about who the bullies are and who the popular kids are. They also spend a solid amount of time fawning over the most beautiful girl in school, Brittany, a girl who seems to treat all of the guys like utter trash when she chooses to even acknowledge them. After going over everything that Larval needs to know to fit into the school, the guys go to the cafeteria to eat lunch. This is where a problem unravels for Larval. Turns out he has an embarrassing secret that only members of his species understand. Larval quietly asks the boys if he can step aside to eat his food, as he doesn't want to embarrass himself. The boys, of course, being curious, whisk Larval off to a nearby storage closet behind a hologram so they can have some privacy. There, Larval begs the boys to not tell his secret to anybody. The boys agree. After this, Larval, ready to show off his most well-kept secret, spits onto his food and sucks up the mucus, devouring it in front of the boys. Lloyd and his friends promise to keep the secret and walk off shocked by what they've just seen. The next day, the boys hear that Larval is sick and will be away for a few days. After the teacher asks if anyone wants to volunteer to bring Larval his books, Brittany quickly responds. Being a total bitch, Brittany jokes that she'd rather die than have to waste time delivering books to such a dweeb. The boys, again feeling a sense of responsibility though to help the new kid, volunteer to visit him and discover that he's from a species that enters into a cocoon state before he can enter into his next form. A few days later, a new student enters the classroom. He's muscular, good-looking, and a pure alpha. He's your typical Jake Ryan. As the teacher eagerly asks the new student for his name, he uncomfortably replies, Larval. Everyone is shocked. Larval now looks to be the total opposite of what he was. And for the boys, this means that they have a new friend who might provide them with a window into a world of actually being popular. While new Larval enters the cafeteria to eat lunch, he's almost instantly approached by Brittany, who asks him to join her at the cool kids table. I guess because Larval feels guilty, though, he insists that his old uncool friends be allowed to sit near the cool table, albeit there being no room for them to sit, except to stand around and eavesdrop on the cool kids' conversations. And although this event does seem kind of strange for Larval, Lloyd, Eddie, and the guys let it slide and continue to brag about being associated with Larval. Soon Jim begins, and given Larval's size, he's picked to be team captain. Now this is when it begins to show that Larval's newfound popularity has gotten to his head. Apparently after a prompt discussion at the popular kids table that Lloyd and his friends were not made aware of, Larval and his friends decided that it would be more efficient to play dodgeball as a team together, with no need for anyone else to become a part of their team. Long story short, Lloyd and the guys are again left out, and this time overtly. This all leads up to the straw that breaks the camel's back. The next day, after Lloyd and the boys somehow find in their hearts to again forgive Larval, Brittany approaches with a message from Larval, or should I say Larval, a new more sophisticated version of his name. Brittany says that Larval doesn't want the guys near him, because he believes that they will tarnish his perfect image at Luna Vista. The boys, shocked by this, decide that it's time for them to partake on some hardcore revenge on this stuck-up prick. Larval also opts to spend a day after school to help Brittany with her homework. Although, as pointed out by the boys, she's a straight-A student and never needs help with her homework. I mean, let's be honest here. We've seen plenty of examples of the kind of person that Brittany is, and we've seen the new Larval. I mean, there's no doubt that she invited him over so they could fuck. I mean, come on. The boys remember his secret and see Larval enter into the janitor's closet, likely to disgustingly spit up on and devour his food. The boys have the balls and are pissed as hell. So, they find the button that will remove the door hologram hiding the janitor's closet to reveal the sick being that is Larval. With the hologram gone and Larval unaware of everyone watching, Larval vomits and devours his lunch, only to the entire school's horror. Brittany running out of the cafeteria to throw up. The boys laugh at the prank, bringing the stuck-up fake alpha prick to his knees. Larval runs out disgraced. After a few days of not returning to school and hearing that Larval recently pulled out, the boys decide to visit Larval's home once again to figure out if Larval killed himself yet. I guess fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how much he hated Larval's arrogant ass, Larval isn't dead. To the boys' surprise, a middle-aged man greets them. He's well-dressed and clearly some sort of businessman. The boys ask to see Larval And to their shock, the grown man is Larval. Apparently, Larval comes from a species that ages very rapidly, and given that, he has now entered into his adult stage. The boys quickly apologize to Larval for what they've done, and Larval, apparently no longer being Larval and a total dick, brushes off the boys' prank and apologizes for his own behavior. He then talks about his current businesses and hands out the boys business cards in case they ever want to join the workforce. Larval then goes on about his investments in tech, quantum computing, and mergers and acquisitions. Yeah, pretty hardcore for Disney, huh? Now, I think the most memorable part of this episode is the very end. At this point, Lloyd walks down the hallway with Larval and curiously asks him about what he and Brittany did that night, saying, Did you, you know. Larval abruptly then responds that he's too old to remember, which in all honesty is probably bullshit, since I guess it would sound kind of creepy for a now fully grown man to talk about going all the way with a teenage high school girl just a week earlier. I mean, that would be awkward as all hell to explain. Now anyways, another memorable thing that I really value about this show, after rewatching it after all these years, is how all the episodes tend to have a lesson to them. And they're not preachy lessons that annoy the shit out of you, but usually a lesson that makes a lot of sense and will truly make your life a little easier. I realized how many life lessons and thought processes I pulled from this show after initially watching it back in the early 2000s. As a kid, this show was a treat, and I never finished an episode feeling disappointed or empty, even in situations where Lloyd didn't end up on top. I learned something and better understood the situation. An example of a great lesson from this show is from the episode Girl from the Center of the Universe. This episode starts off with Cindy, the two-headed girl, introducing Lloyd and his friends to Serena. Now, Serena is a beautiful alien girl from the center of the universe. She acquaints herself with the gang, but makes an effort to get to know Douglas McNoggin the best. After the guys leave, they have a short conversation, and during it, she asks if he can hold her books and bring them to class so she can have her hands free. Douglas, though, sure that he can't ruin his perfect attendance record, underlines that he'd love to help out but can't. This is where we learn of Serena's power over men. She looks Douglas in the eyes and shines a hypnotic beam through her eyes. Douglas is cast under her spell and gladly grabs a hold of her books and brings them to class for her. He returns to his class late, and the teacher, surprised to see him tardy for the first time, asks him what his deal is. Douglas dances, falling in love with the sweet Serena, talking of his new girlfriend. As the episode progresses, though, Douglas is more and more taken advantage of by Serena. He does her homework, he buys her food, and it soon becomes clear that he's just doing errands for her. Soon the boys decide to confront this gold-digging bitch, and Kurt is one of the first to be alone with her. Within a matter of minutes, she casts a spell upon him, and again he is just as much a slave for her as Douglas is, dancing in the halls, doing her errands, and being late for class. For the guys, this is the last straw. It's one thing for one of their friends to be taken advantage of, but total bullcrap for two friends to become slaves to some thought. Eddie confronts Serena, ready to put this girl in her place, only until he looks into her eyes. He is cast under her spell. He falls in love with her beauty and returns to school the next day dressed in silk attire, with well-oiled hair. He's late for class like the other guys and dances in the halls professing his love for such a stunning being. For Lloyd, this is the last straw. He must devise a plan to stop this bitch from turning half the school into her own personal cuck army. He decides to team up with Cindy so the two can confront Serena and Lloyd can use her own powers against her. Lloyd confronts Serena. She looks into his eyes ready to cast her spell, and Lloyd quickly pulls a mirror and points it towards Serena's face. This is his plan, to get Serena to hypnotize herself. She looks confused, then fawns over her own reflection. Lloyd laughs as he's gotten the crazy bitch to fall for herself. That's until Serena laughs in Lloyd's face, tricking him. She couldn't possibly hypnotize herself to fall in love with herself, since she says she's already madly in love with herself. Shit, what's Lloyd to do? Serena finally admits her true plan. She brags that she uses men's lack of confidence to get them to fall under her spell, and that she simply finds a void in one's confidence and fills it in by making them feel that they're important. All her spell is the ability to take advantage of one's own desperation and unsureness of self. This is a pretty intense lesson for a Disney show. Lloyd is beat. That is until Cindy arrives. She has a surprise for Serena. Behind her stands a boy from the center of the universe. Then he looks into her eyes and hypnotizes her to fall under his spell. Finally, the girl who enslaves half the school is a slave herself, and all the men under her spell are finally free. I thought this episode was very strange but well written. There's something about sci-fi cartoons that came out around this time that made them somewhat more relatable, especially in the sense that they didn't take themselves too seriously. Now this brings me to my favorite episode of the entire series, the Love Beam episode. This episode starts off with the flashback of Brittany Bouviac as a little girl walking her dog as Lloyd carves something into a nearby tree. Turns out Lloyd is carving an admission of his love for Brittany, only for Brittany to jump through the bushes and see him doing it. Brittany is disgusted and Lloyd, embarrassed, turns away never to mention it again. Soon back to the present, we see that Douglas has invented a device that can force beings into falling in love with each other, called the Love Beam. The boys, being curious and kind of cruel, decide to test the beam on their fellow students. So they zap a few students with the beam to test its potency. And with a few positive results, they decide to do the most grand test of all, to make Brittany fall in love with the nerd. Lloyd, shocked by the cruelty of this, wrestles away the remote from Eddie only for it to be dropped and to shoot a love beam directly at Brittany. Who could Brittany fall in love with? Guess. She takes a hold of Lloyd's arms and grabs onto him like he's the only thing in the world that matters. Brittany's friend, who is a bitch, is embarrassed to see such a sight. Brittany Bouviac, the prettiest girl in school, falling for a dweeb. Ew. Brittany's obsession with Lloyd only begins here. She follows him to his friend's house and eagerly waits outside of the door so she could join them as they play video games. She does cheerleading for Lloyd while he battles his friends on his games console and even gives him cute nicknames. It turns out that Lloyd's dream of Brittany falling in love with him has turned out a little different from expected. But honestly, he thinks she's hot, so fuck it. Upon arriving home, he finds Brittany dressed as a housewife. She apparently cooked him dinner. At this point, I just asked the girl to marry me. She acquainted herself with Lloyd's mom, spending the past hour blabbering about her love for Lloyd and admitting to Lloyd's little sister that she soon plans to marry him. At this point, Lloyd is freaked the fuck out. He always wanted Brittany to be his girlfriend, but not like this. She's getting obsessive and freaky. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Why give it up now? He returns to school the next day to see Brittany has passed around newspapers completely dedicated to Lloyd. They have his pictures plastered on front, Lloyd crossword puzzles, and even articles about how dreamy he is. Lloyd is taken aback. This has to be the furthest this crazy bitch will go, at least in his mind. He then proceeds to walk into the school center, only to see a massive blimp flown with Brittany projecting a video of herself in her bedroom. She then proceeds to sing probably one of the most early 2000s songs I've ever heard.
I'm so surprised, I'm hypnotized. 'Cause when you looked deep in my eyes, you suddenly made me realize that I totally love you. I totally love you. And I totally I love you. I love you. See you in a minute, lover boy.
After this, Lloyd realizes that this has become a problem. He consults his friends to create a device that reverses the effect, and brings her to the park to confront her and try to turn her back to her old self. This is where Brittany gives Lloyd the biggest surprise of all. As he tries to explain to her that a girl like her could never fall in love with a guy like him, Brittany rejects this idea and says that she is madly in love with him. Lloyd denies this and says that she's simply being cast into the spell of the love device, and that she has never and will never feel any true emotion towards him. She then responds with this.
Can't knock it off. I love you.
No, you don't!
Yes, I do, and I can prove it to you. Come, there's something I want to show you. Remember this from when we were 5?
Sure, you caught me carving it.
Yeah, but you don't know the whole story. See, after you ran off crying... Lloyd loves Brittany?
You carved something too?
Yes, Lloyd.
Brittany loves Lloyd too?
It's true, Lloyd. Of course, back then, boys were supposed to be yicky, so I couldn't tell anyone. And then I became cool, so I couldn't be seen with you. But secretly, I've always loved you.
You really have, haven't you? And now, because of the beam, you can admit it. Lloyd!
It turns out that Brittany truly loved Lloyd all along. She pretended to hate him for years to salvage her reputation, but with the effect of the love beam, she finally has enough energy to truly show her true emotions towards him. This episode, to this day, still gives me chills. I love how the show set this all up so well, with Brittany's horrible behavior towards Lloyd in previous episodes, only to have her reveal this, here. It all makes sense. She overplayed her hate for him only to hide how she truly feels towards him. Now this is where things get exciting. Lloyd's friends have cocked the laser and are ready to shoot Brittany with it to bring her back to her regular old self. And Lloyd, now enlightened to see that the real Brittany actually does love him, runs off, escaping his friend's efforts to bring Brittany back to the state of repressed emotion that she previously had for him. Now the two sit in space, overlooking the entire town. It's absolutely beautiful. It's almost as though everything in the series so far has led up to this very moment. Brittany sits next to Lloyd, smiling, and Lloyd is in pure heaven. Brittany brags about how all that matters for her now is for him to be happy. In fact, this is now the only thing that she cares about. She'll put aside her school, push away her friends, and throw away whatever future awaits her, just to sacrifice herself for Lloyd. She truly loves him, and the rest of her life will be devoted to him. Lloyd sees how much this could ruin her life, all of the opportunities that will pass her by as she gives up all that was her for all that is him. He then decides to make one of the hardest decisions of his life, to give up Brittany and bring her back to her old self. She is transformed back into her old self and walks off angrily. The other guys ask Lloyd why he would do such a thing, as a girl like Brittany could never end up with a guy like Lloyd ever again. Lloyd smiles and looks at the carving in the tree, remembering Brittany's secret, and says, "Not yet, but one day she will." The show never had a true ending as it was cancelled in 2004, before it could have one. One Lost-centered episode exists, and several old completed storyboards exist that are floating somewhere around online. But what I would give to have a true ending to this show. Lloyd in Space was one of the most special cartoons I've ever seen. From its beautiful story backgrounds and artwork to its touching musical scores, I will never ever see another cartoon like this again. I will never forget the great lessons I learned from this show as a kid, and the beauty of the Love Beam episode. In my mind, judging from what was hinted at the end of the Love Beam episode, I imagine as Lloyd grows older and Brittany matures, they truly do fall in love with each other. I imagine the series ending with Lloyd and Brittany holding hands as they walk through a vast park under a rich starry sky. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and all the best. Thanks.